Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. US President Trump threatens Russia with fresh sanctions if they don't do a deal with Ukraine. Trump also weighs up a 10% import tariff on China over his concerns of fentanyl use. A Turkish ski resort fire claims the lives of 76 people, whilst 9 others are detained over safety concerns. And 9 people have died as the Deep South faces a deep freeze. To our top story, and US President Donald Trump, who's just 3 days into the job, continues to make his mark. He's due to make an address at the World Economic Forum in Davos any moment now. But earlier in the day, he was back on social media, calling out Russia and a cathedral bishop for a service he attended with his family in Washington yesterday. Let's get the latest from our Washington correspondent, Caroline Malone. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Trump is due to speak at the Davos summit any moment now, but he's been using Truth Social to bring us his latest thoughts. Let's start with Russia. He's threatening sanctions on Russian goods if Putin doesn't end the war with Ukraine. Can you tell us any more?
Yes, absolutely. So among the statements that President Trump has been making, as you say, is relating to trying to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. And as part of a wider statement, he's been saying, without a deal, without getting to a peace deal between those countries, then I will have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. So really a threat there, not just to essentially sanction Russia, but others that might be involved and taking part in this war with Ukraine. He said as part of his campaign all along that he wants to end the war with Ukraine. He said he would do it on, quote, day one. Clearly, he hasn't been able to do that. That was somewhat of an impossibility. But it does seem to be high on his agenda, potentially for the first 100 days. A lot of analysts have been looking at how he might do that. And, you know, on the agenda is Donald Trump speaking directly, potentially, to President Putin of Russia. We know in the past that's something that they've been able to do when he was the last president in the last Trump administration. They spoke on the phone, and that's something they are potentially looking at meeting in person, we understand, to try and come to some peace talks. So look, this is all part of really potentially Trump's wider campaign of maybe even using the threat of sanctions, the threat of tariffs, to try and be in a stronger position when he gets to the table and when he tries to get a deal bashed out between Russia and Ukraine, using that kind of economic leverage to get the people he wants to agree on something.
Putin's not the only one to feel Trump's wrath today. He's asked the bishop who conducted yesterday's cathedral service to apologise, calling her a radical, hardline Trump hater. Can you tell us why?
So President Trump and other officials and family members attended a service at the Washington National Cathedral just yesterday. And in that service, the bishop spoke in her sermon about asking basically President Trump to extend grace to the people who might be impacted by his policies. And specifically, she referenced how not all immigrants to the United States are criminals, how the vast majority are good, hardworking people, and to consider how they must be feeling at this time, and particularly those who might be feeling scared. Really an appeal on a religious grounds, it appears, to Donald Trump, to his administration, to J.D. Vance, who is sitting next to him, or to people down from him on the front rows of the pews in the church, to really have some sympathy, ultimately, have some empathy with the people who are going to be impacted by his policies. You know, in videos that were shown both of the bishop and of President Trump and Vice President Vance, they are paying attention to what the bishop is saying, and they are sort of staring back at her. At one moment, Vance and Trump look at each other, are clearly sort of potentially, not happy with what she said. And Trump comes out afterwards and says, basically, he didn't think it was a particularly interesting service. But Obviously, she's touched a nerve, this bishop, in trying to point out to the Trump administration, to point out directly to President Trump that there are good, hardworking immigrants in the United States, even if they don't have the right paperwork, and that under religious reasons, it would be good to extend grace to them.
Yes, indeed. And the Justice Department have ordered prosecutors to investigate state and city officials if they refuse to carry out President Trump's immigration policies. How will this be enforced?
So what we are expecting to happen really any hour or day now is that the immigration, the customs and enforcement groups are likely to go into some select cities of the United States and carry out deportation raids. They have highlighted that's something they are going to do. It's been spoken about by President Trump, and also his border czar, talking about trying to get rid of illegal immigrants in the United States. They've talked a lot about criminal illegal immigrants in the United States, but the feeling is that this could actually impact a much wider group of people, those without the correct paperwork, even if they are people with jobs and who pay taxes and have, an established life in the United States. There are also what's called sanctuary cities in the United States. There are areas where immigrants are particularly well protected. So President Trump's administration is talking, I think, specifically about when these raids happen, when people move in from the ICE group to try and deport people. If anyone gets in the way, then he's encouraging legal sides of those states, so the state attorneys and others, to then take action against them. So really warning anyone not to disrupt this process, because he is essentially saying there will be some legal follow-up to that if they do.
Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you so much. Staying with President Trump now, who said his threat to hit China with 10% tariffs on all imports was still on the table and indicated it could come as soon as next month. He says it's because fentanyl is being sent from China to the US via Mexico and Canada. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping and emphasized their close ties yesterday. Laura Westbrook has more.
This video call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping took place just hours after Donald Trump was sworn in. The two leaders reportedly chatted for 90 minutes on a video call, with President Xi saying that the partnership with Putin remains strong. Putin, meanwhile, called Xi a dear friend and said China and Russia were building ties despite external pressure. Now, these two leaders established this no-limits relationship in 2022, weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine, and have grown closer ever since. Now, neither side mentioned Trump in statements released after the call, and Putin's foreign affairs advisor Yuri Ushakov told reporters that the call had been planned in advance and was not connected with Trump's inauguration. But he also said that both leaders expressed a readiness to develop ties with Washington. Now, Trump has threatened tariffs on Beijing and warns there would be big trouble for Moscow if a deal to end the war in Ukraine is not reached. Some analysts believe Beijing could offer Trump help by using its influence on Russia in resolving the war in Ukraine. And on Friday, Trump spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping, reportedly discussing trade, fentanyl and TikTok, but Putin has yet to talk to Trump. Now, Trump also said during an event at the White House that he was still considering putting a 10% tariff on imports from China on February the 1st. And this does repeat a threat that he made on the campaign trail. He vowed to implement 60% tariffs for all goods imported from China. And he later threatened to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods unless Beijing does more to stop the flow of the drug fentanyl. And that's not good for China. Its economy is slowing, and so it signaled a willingness to do a deal to avoid those tariffs. China's foreign ministry said on Wednesday that Beijing was willing to maintain communication with the US to handle differences. A spokeswoman said that China believes there is no winner in a trade war, but China would safeguard its interests. And earlier, we also heard from a top Chinese official, Ding Weixing. He's the vice premier, and he was speaking in Davos. He said that his country was looking for a win-win solution to trade tensions and that he wanted to expand its imports, although he did not mention the US by name. Now, on Monday, Trump ordered an investigation into Chinese trade practices, but held off on announcing any new tariffs. Some analysts are seeing it as a bit of a softer tone from Trump towards China and say it's rekindled hope in Beijing that negotiations might be possible to avert a second trade war.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you. Let's get into this further with economist Laurie Laird. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Good evening.
Now, despite the aggressive talk, the 10% tariff would actually be much less than the 60% tariff Donald Trump mentioned on the campaign trail. So is China breathing a sigh of relief today?
I think a little bit, and I think also that China will be very pleased to see that the vice premier or the vice president had a real seat of honor at the inauguration, where a number of Europeans would have loved to have been that close to the action on Monday. So I think that does give Chinese corporates a little bit of hope that perhaps Trump may climb down on some of his promises. His promises were vague anyway, right? He talked about 60%, then he talked about additional tariffs on China above some amount that had been unmentioned. So his attitude toward China has been a little unclear. What is clear is that the first countries to be in his sights have been Canada and Mexico, right? And he's talked about imposing tariffs there as soon as the 1st of February. So it does seem that China has got a bit of a reprieve. That said, the Chinese markets today were pretty grim. Most of the major stock market indices down about 1%, which goes against what was happening in the rest of Asia, where we saw a bit of a rally in all the other markets, Korea and Japan. So a little bit of caution, I think, from Chinese corporates, Chinese investors.
Tariffs are a really important part of Trump's economic plans. He believes they can boost growth, protect jobs, and also raise tax revenue. But is this actually the reality of tariffs?
Remember, tariff is one of the most beautiful words, right? That was part of Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric. This is absolutely remarkable because the people that pay tariffs are U.S. business. Well, any U.S. or U.S. domiciled business that is bringing in exports from another place. That's where the money comes from. And in fact, it tends to come almost on a direct debit. So if you're a car company working in the U.S. and you want imported steel, whatever the tariff is, let's say 20%, that is paid usually by direct debit from the importing company's bank account. That's remitted to the U.S. government. So it's not a faceless foreign company that is paying this tariff. It's actually a U.S. importer, which often, given all the we have a large body of economic evidence here, ultimately passes that cost on to the consumer. So this is quite a remarkable campaign promise from Donald Trump, because one of his mandates was to fight inflation, right? He's managed to convince American voters that he's going to impose tariffs, which could be inflationary, yet convince them that this is a really good thing. Utterly remarkable. But most economists believe that tariffs will ultimately be inflationary and not in the benefit of U.S. consumers.
Earlier today, Trump threatened Russia with taxes, tariffs, and sanctions if a deal is not made to settle what he has called this ridiculous war. What does it mean for Russia, who's already economically isolated, and that we know?
Interesting. This was a post on Truth Social that came out a couple of hours ago that you've mentioned. Really convoluted post. I had to read it a couple of times to figure out what Donald Trump meant. But it seemed to be a threat to further sink the Russian economy if Vladimir Putin doesn't come to the negotiating table. Now, interesting ploy. a number of Russian officials have come out, including the head of the central bank, have come out and said, look, the Russian economy is in very poor shape. About 40% of the budget is devoted to military spending. But you have to remember that Vladimir Putin doesn't have to face things like free and fair elections. His electorate, despite the fact his electorate may be suffering, he's not really, doesn't have to be aware of those concerns. I suspect that Russia will continue to find homes for its LNG, its liquefied natural gas. In fact, a lot of it's going to the EU right now. The EU bought more LNG in the first 3 weeks of January than it has in any 3 weeks of January on record. So that some of those exports, despite the existing sanctions, are still finding homes. Now, I suspect that Donald Trump will say to the European Union, look, if you want to avoid tariffs on your goods, you got to find a way to stop buying that Russian gas. Can Russia reroute that gas to more friendly countries like China, like India? It's possible, although most of that gas is coming from a refinery that's not particularly convenient for Asia. But Russia has found ways, because it has this scarce resource that has gas, it has found ways to reroute this. So I'm not sure how effective those threats may be.
Economist Laird, fantastic insights. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
My pleasure.
To Turkey now, where the country is marking a national day of mourning after a fire ripped through a ski resort in the Bolu Mountains. 76 people, including children, died following the blaze at the Grand Kartal Hotel, and police have detained 9 people, including the owner of the hotel. Questions are now being raised about the building's safety measures. Let's go live to Istanbul to speak to the foreign news editor of NTV, Sare Selvi Ozturk. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Firstly, what can you tell us about the safety measures which are being investigated?
And officials here are saying that the hotel fire in the ski resort in Turkey's Bolu Mountains is being investigated in great detail. But there are big questions about whether the hotel's fire system were properly inspected, because the major conflict that we have seen today in Turkey is who checks the hotel's fire safety. Because the mayor of Bolu, Tanju Özcan, said that the Ministry of Tourism was responsible as the hotel was beyond the boundary of his town. And the mayor also said the last time Bolu municipality had given a report stating the hotel was fireproof was in 2007, and there had been no such checks since then. And on the other hand, we have had Culture and Tourism Minister Mehmet Nur Ersoy saying today, hotel did have a fire competence certificate issued by the fire department, which is under the control of Bolu municipality, and the inspections were down to them. And today also, what's more interesting that an official document issued by the Bolu municipality has been circulating on Turkish TV bulletins and social media. This very document shows that the Bolu Municipality Fire Department has given approval for the restaurant only 3 weeks ago, on January 2nd. This restaurant, which is located inside the Grand Kartal Hotel where the disaster occurred, and the document records that it is in accordance with the regulation on the protection of buildings from fire. So, but as we hear from the guest who survived the fire, they said like the extinguishing system wasn't activated after the fire started. In addition, there were no escape routes between the floors, and the smoke alarm didn't work. So the fire spread quickly because of the wooden cladding of the interior and exterior of the hotel, and this accelerated the fire and caused the flames to grow even more.
As you mentioned there, many survivors and eyewitnesses have been speaking out about their ordeal and what they went through, and also making their way through really smoky corridors. It was completely dark. What else have we been hearing about what families have gone through?
Well, we have seen lots of footages emerging today. In one particular video in which the very first moments of ski hotel fire, in this video, you can hear the screams of people crying for help. They are saying they don't know how to leave the building, and they said that they are burning. So like we have seen some other videos emerge on social media. In these videos, like some guests on the higher floors, they tried to escape the building by tying bed sheets, and some of them jumped to their deaths because of the lack of the fire escapes. And today, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced a day of national mourning, and also like some funerals of the victims were held. And there was one particular family that everyone has been talking and reporting about because 14 members of this family were among the people who died in the deadly fire. And this same family happened to be one of the President Erdogan's old friends' family and a former AK Party member. And we've seen President Erdogan attending the funeral, and he was seen crying during this ceremony. And we also heard about the names and identity of some of the victims who lost their lives in this fire. There were very well-known names, some academics, journalists, and sports people.
As we mentioned, 9 people have been detained by police. What else are authorities telling us at the moment?
Well, as of 1 hour ago, the number of who have been detained in the connection with this deadly fire has risen to 11. And again, just minutes ago before this show, we heard that Deputy Mayor of Bolu Municipality, who signed the document that I mentioned earlier, he's among those who detained. Also today, we heard from the Justice Minister. He said that the hotel's owner was among the people detained for questioning. And Turkish government also today announced that they appointed 6 prosecutors to lead an investigation into the fire.
Sare, Selvi, Ozturk in Istanbul, thank you so much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. 2 people, including a 2-year-old boy, have been killed and 2 others are seriously injured after a stabbing in Germany. The incident took place at a park in the town of Aschaffenburg. Police have detained a suspect and have asked witnesses to come forward. At least 19 have died in an Indonesian landslide. Hundreds of rescuers are scouring through thick mud and debris to find survivors. Intense rainfall sparked the disaster in the mountainous area in the central Java province. Bridges have collapsed and cars and houses have been buried as a result. Prince Harry has settled his privacy invasion lawsuit against the publisher of The Sun newspaper. It's after News Group newspapers issued a rare apology to the British royal for years of unlawful intrusion. He will be paid a substantial sum as part of the settlement. And South Korea's birth rate is set to rise for the first time in 9 years. It's after a rebound in marriages following a dip during the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of newborns between January and November 2024 rose 3% from a year earlier. South Korea has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world. At least 10 Palestinians have died and around 40 are injured after an Israeli airstrike in the Jenin area of the West Bank. The attacks come just days after the weekend ceasefire in Gaza. Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Sadafi has warned that the ongoing raids in the West End could destabilize the entire region. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent, Sare. Sare, thank you so much for joining me this evening. The ceasefire may have been agreed and a number of hostages and prisoners released, but there's been no let-up in the level of violence there.
Hi there, Leigh Ann. You're certainly right. This is only intensifying, escalating on the back of that ceasefire, which of course did come into play in Gaza just a few days ago. And according to Israeli officials, it's part of a broader campaign against militants in the West Bank, citing an uptick of violence against Israelis in that area. But certainly on the ground, it is a very worrying situation. That's what we've heard from Jordan's Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi. In addition to these 10 people that have already been killed, the dozens of others wounded, medics on the ground say that there are quite a large number of people that ambulances simply cannot get to, and this is because they say they're being blocked by the Israeli military. So this is certainly causing a lot of alarm bells. And we've also just heard over the past few hours from the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He came out to say that this is deeply concerning.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the strike in Jenin was an additional step in the Israeli objective to bolster security in the West Bank. Why is that area so important to him, and what does he want to actually achieve?
We do have a statement from the Prime Minister's office. He says that the operation will be extensive and significant to eradicate terrorism in Jenin. We also do need to remember the amount of pressure that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under, especially from the far right-wing members of his coalition who really didn't want to see this ceasefire come into play in Gaza and have been pushing Benjamin Netanyahu to keep fighting this war. So this could certainly be seen, this raid in the West Bank, as something that would potentially appease these people and also take a bit of pressure off him there. But also in that statement from his office, that was also citing Iran. It says, we're operating in a systematic and decisive way against the Iranian axis wherever it sends its arms, in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and in Judea and Samaria. But we do need to also point out that it's not just raids that we're seeing from the Israeli military. There's been a massive spike in violence over just the past few days of Israeli settlers storming a number of villages, setting fire to cars, homes, and beating people. Leigh Ann.
The UN Secretary-General has been speaking at the Davos summit today. He said Iran must make the first step towards improving relations in the region and the US over nuclear weapons. Is a permanent truce actually likely going further?
I think that looks pretty unlikely, especially when we're talking about Iran and Israel, given the fierce relationship or lack thereof that they have. And we also need to take into account what we heard from the spokesperson from Iran's Atomic Energy Agency just on Monday. He said that Tehran's nuclear program remains central to strengthening national security and deterring international threats. But I think what we can expect to see is President Donald Trump really taking a hard line on Iran to try and further isolate it here in the region and also develop further alliances between, let's say, potentially Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would expand on the Abraham Accords, further push Iran out and further bring Israel into the fold. Leigh Ann.
Sare Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me. At least 9 people have died after a record winter storm hit southern parts of the United States, bringing snow, ice and dangerous conditions to millions of people. Much of the region, which includes Texas, Louisiana and Florida, rarely sees any snowfall, prompting some unlikely scenes in places usually basking in sunshine, as Nick Harper reports.
New Orleans' French Quarter is known for its music, just not normally in such a wintry setting. It's a rare occurrence in the Louisiana city, which hasn't seen snowfall since 2009. The Sunshine State swaps scorching temperatures for wintry weather. Florida's beaches blanketed with record-setting snow. While police and firefighters in Houston, Texas, took a moment to enjoy the unexpected weather. Schools in the city and in much of the southern region remain closed, with only a few people venturing out.
Yeah, the snow is beautiful. Look at this. Yeah, so soft and it's thicker than I expected. So I think it's great.
It's actually really fun having it here because it's kind of a throwback to my childhood and college days.
But the snow dump also brought plenty of problems. Dangerous conditions on the roads and more than 2,000 flights cancelled. 33 million people from Texas through Georgia and into the Carolinas and Florida have been hit by the deadly deep freeze, with wintry weather alerts now issued in at least 7 states. In the nation's capital, snow from earlier this month is yet to melt. No bad thing for some of the city's newest residents, 2 pandas from China. The pair make their public debut this Friday. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News.
Time for a look at the top business news. And Saudi Arabia's Prince Al Walid bin Tali's investment company has told Al Arabiya Business they are interested in investing in TikTok if Elon Musk or others did offer. Here's what he had to say at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
If Mr. Musk today presented an opportunity for an investment in TikTok, since his name is on the table as one of the potential buyers of TikTok, are you interested in that?
If Mr. Musk or others offered, we would have an interest in looking into this investment, no doubt.
Meanwhile, Meta, the social media giant behind Facebook and Instagram, have offered to pay US content creators up to $5,000 if they join their platforms. It says those joining from third-party social apps will get cash based on an evaluation of their social presence. Although it doesn't mention TikTok specifically, it has thought Meta is taking advantage of the uncertain future facing its biggest rival. Now, Netflix has added nearly 90 million subscribers during the holiday season to end last year with more than 300 million subscribers. Company executives credited steady investments in shows and films with helping power growth at the streaming giant, while also it's announcing it's increasing prices in Argentina, Canada, Portugal, and the US. Netflix ended 2024 with a strong lineup, which of course included a second season of the global hit Squid Game. Turning our attention to sport now, and defending champion Jannik Sinner is safely through to the last 4 after a dominant win over home favourite Alex de Minaur in the Australian Open. He'll face Ben Shelton on Friday after the American saw Lorenzo Sonigo. In the women's draw, Iga Swiatek breezed through despite a double bounce controversy and will take on Madison Keys for a place in the final. Now, Lewis Hamilton has had his first experience of a Ferrari Formula One car at the team's Ferrano test track over in Italy. The 40-year-old 7-time champion tested a 2023 vehicle today as part of his acclimatization work with his new team. Teammate Charles Leclerc will drive the car in the afternoon as he begins to get back up to speed after the winter break. A reminder of our top stories today. US President Trump threatens Russia with fresh sanctions if they don't do a deal with Ukraine. Trump also weighs up a 10% import tariff on China over his concerns of fentanyl use. A Turkish ski resort fire claims the lives of 76 people, whilst 9 others are detained over safety concerns. And 9 people have died as the Deep South faces a deep freeze. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next is Riz Khan, and don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night.